Okay, so this is just a little brief video for covering auteur theory, just the basics of it. We'll talk more about it in class, but I just want y'all to have this so that you can use it for your own purposes as you approach the exam this week. Okay. So the first thing we need to understand a little bit about where auteur theory comes from is trying to understand the history of French film culture in the 1950s specifically. Basically, what's happening in France in the post-war period is that there is a huge growth in youth culture generally that is fueled in large part by kind of people who are obsessed with films. France historically has like a really strong affinity for film criticism and kind of getting together to discuss and pick apart movies. This goes all the way back to other art forms as well. It's the how cafe culture came to be in Western Europe. Kind of the ideas, like the place you would get together and discuss ideas and politics and stuff like that. In the 1950s, one of the central places where ideas were being bandied about in France were film clubs. So people would host film screenings and then discuss them afterwards. And this was a very big deal at the time. Immediately during and then immediately following the war, World War II, France kind of had a moment of crisis in its film industry and kind of settled into a very specific type of filmmaking, something that Francois Truffaut terms the tradition of quality, where they were emphasizing literary adaptation of great works, plays, things like that, and putting it on the screen. This is kind of the basic tenet of what he's talking about. More on that in just a second. But beyond that, the other thing that's going on in France and at these film clubs is that, because most European countries and most Asian countries had had an economic collapse right around the time of the war and also were resource poor in the mid 1940s. What this meant was Hollywood had been churning out films this entire time. The studio system, hundreds of films a year. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, all of these films kind of showed up at once in places like France and Germany and even in England. And this had a profound impact on how specifically these younger film critics like Truffaut, Godard, even to a lesser extent, because he was slightly older, Andre Bazin, were thinking about movies. So imagine that like you had not seen a Hitchcock film since the late 1930s. And then all of a sudden you get 10 more Hitchcock movies and they all show up and you see them back to back to back to back, right? So a lot of the thinking about auteur theory comes out of this ability to see large groups of films from filmmakers all at once and then to trace the similarities through them. Sorry for my stuttering tonight. Okay, so this also goes into a little bit of what like French film culture became as criticism. So the biggest, most influential film journal of this period was published in France. It's called Cahiers du Cinéma. It's where all of these French New Wave directors wrote for. And Truffaut publishes constantly in them. And for a period in the 1950s, what he's really hammering away at is kind of the stagnation of French cinema more generally and trying to, argue for vitality and a way forward that emphasizes artistic value, personal value, and political value as opposed to literary value. Okay. Those of you who have taken film history classes or studied a little bit on your own will know that like similar critical movements happen kind of all around the same time. So in Japan, there's a new wave that is fueled kind of exclusively by some of these same elements, the youth culture, film culture being a big thing, jazz music, pop music in general, wherever. It takes place a little later than the French New Wave, but the New German Cinema also references a lot of the same things that Truffaut is talking about as having stagnated film productions and film culture in France. Like, you know, he calls it father's cinema. Well, they do the same thing in their Oberhausen manifesto in the 1970s when the new German directors come in, your people like Werner Herzog, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, Wim Wenders, and so on. Okay, Margarita von Trotta. So this is kind of where we're coming from and what the historical background of all of this is, okay? So Truffaut's kind of big essay, well, he has two of them. We've read one of them. The other one we haven't read is, I don't speak French, so I'm not going to say the French title, but it's basically the politics of authorship, okay, or the politics of the authors. This is the one that sort of immediately precedes that, a certain tendency of the French cinema. And it's really where he breaks down his argument about like the problems with French filmmaking and French film directors specifically, and starts to argue for a certain type of filmmaking that emphasizes a different type of authorship. Okay, so let's take a look at some of this, what he's saying here. Okay, as I've just said, a lot of this is a pushback against the French cinema of the immediate post-war period, what he calls the tradition of quality. Okay, the argument is that we see in French cinema of the late 40s and 1950s, which is usually an adaptation of some classic work of either literature or the stage. He says that French cinema is a writer's cinema. Okay. And he means this in a very specific sense. He means that when the script is done, that is what is considered the work of art. And he does not consider the work of the director to add artistic value to it. And he says you see this in the films. Okay. So the director is not an auteur. They're a metteur en scène, which means that they're a person that arranges the mise en scène, right? That's what the designation is. And it's because the director maybe doesn't even lack artistic vision, but the films themselves lack an artistic vision of cinematic quality, not of literary quality. Okay, so if you're emphasizing the script, if the screenplay, the adaptation itself is what you're seeing the artistic value in, your films will inherently not carry a cinematic value of equal importance. Okay. And for Truffaut, part of what he's arguing is that this saps the film of any political import, personality, and things of that nature. Okay. So he argues kind of toward the end of the essay that what French cinema needs is a turn toward artistic value of the cinema, okay, which needs an author who speaks and understands the language of cinema, not of literature and the other arts. All right. I'm going to show a clip here from Beauty and the Beast, which is actually quite a good film. Truffaut also would not say that most of these films are not good, but he would say that they're not necessarily cinematic in the same way that he's conceptualizing of what cinema is. We can develop this idea in our discussion, of course, and probably will have by the time you are able to watch this video. But I'm going to show you a clip from Beauty and the Beast by Jean Cocteau from 1946, and you'll kind of get a sense of what he's talking about here. So if the thing that's important in these films, according to Truffaut, is to adapt the spirit of the work, right? Even if it's not verbatim necessarily, then you're privileging a certain type of screenwriting. And that's going to cause a stagnation within the industry. So let's take a look at this clip from Beauty and the Beast, and then we'll pick back up afterwards.
Je vous croyais en train de souper, la belle.
Je n'ai plus faim, la bête, et je préfère me promener avec vous.
Belle, c'est un grand privilège que vous me faites. Un grand privilège.
On dirait que vous avez la voix plus douce.
Belle. Vous ne vous ennuyez pas trop toute la journée.
Je trouve les journées longues. Et ce soir, j'avoue que j'attendais presque cette heure.
Quand je vous vois si bonne, j'ose à peine vous poser la question qui m'angoisse et qui me fait du mal.
Posez-la, j'y répondrai toujours de la même manière. Soyons amis, la bête. Ne me demandez rien de plus. Et vous, la bête, que faites-vous toute la journée? M'entendez-vous, la bête? Je vous parle.
Excusez-moi.
Hé, la bête, où êtes-vous?
Excusez-moi. Excusez-moi. Ce n'est rien.
Okay, so in that clip, we can see, certain themes that are kind of straight out of the source material of Beauty and the Beast, the fairy tale, of him wrestling with like his animal instincts at this moment when he's supposed to be and has been like behaving more human-like, okay, and trying to emphasize those qualities of himself. Now, as I've said, Truffaut didn't consider this a bad movie. He just argues that you can't see authorship in it from anybody who's making the film, only the screenplay, because the emphasis is on the staging and the dialogue in particular, all of which is in the script. Okay, so he, alongside several other critics at Cartier, start to develop ideas of authorship, the concept of the auteur, right? And so what is this? Well, the argument is that you can see the director's imprint in the film. Okay. There might be other forms of authorship that you can see in the film. Certainly this has been debated and we can discuss it in lecture in our classes this week. But you see the director's imprint in the film, their thematic obsessions, their stylistic impulses. And crucially, not every director is an auteur. Auteurs have a sense of style and a certain tone or quality to their work. Now, for Truffaut, there were a few big people. Alfred Hitchcock is kind of the big idol for him as far as thinking through this, okay? And there are a couple of reasons. Not only do you see kind of Hitchcock's obsessions throughout his work, like you truly do see this stuff, right? His obsession with blondes and his obsession with kind of playing games with the audience, right? Their expectations, hiding information from them, giving it away at just the right moment, exactly when he wants to do it. The essay we read by D.A. Miller this week, right? The whole idea that he's just playing games with his viewers and rewarding them for going back and seeing the film multiple times, right? Which may or may not even be true, but just the fact that you can think that sort of points to what Truffaut is getting at here. Okay. But other directors he would lump in with Hitchcock are like Jean Renoir, people who kind of could articulate their vision and that you could see their vision in the work. That's what's important for him. Okay. Not every film of an auteur is great, but there are enough of them that are great that qualify them to a certain status. All right. So it's a very simple concept. What happens to this is it becomes kind of picked up by an American film critic, Andrew Sarris, who develops this idea further. Okay. He adopts Truffaut's theory in the late 1950s, but in the 1960s is when he kind of picks it up and runs with it. But there are other people debating auteurism at this time as well. And some people are arguing like you can see it in the way that the set design is done, right? So that we need to think about those people. Some are arguing that you need to think about the cinematographer because they're literally kind of creating the look of the film along with the camera crew, right? Sarris takes up a much stronger stance on the director being the author of the film than even the French critics do, which gets him a little bit of blowback from other film critics in his time. And as time has gone on, even though we kind of widely accept the idea of the director as author of the work, it's not the only way we talk about films, but Sarris was kind of hyper interested in this aspect of it. And he outlines in his piece kind of the three premises of auteur, of an auteur's status. Okay, so you have to consider the technical competence of the director as a criterion of value. You have to consider the distinguishable personality of the director as a criterion of value. And you also, and most importantly for him, be able to discern the interior meaning that the director has put into the film and that the audience can get out of it, right? So this is, he says, extrapolated from the tension between a director's personality and his material. Okay. It's another way of thinking about how you can see the director's personality and style come through. And what's important for Sarris, just like Truffaut, in particular relationship to Hollywood directors, is that they argue you can see this even in a system that is designed to not allow you to see an author because it's so many moving parts, right? The American Hollywood system is a Fordist model of production. It's very highly delineated labor where people are doing very specific jobs, screenplay, rigging, lighting, set design, whatever, and then it all comes together. But they're saying that the director kind of is the last stop of decision making. And because of that, even within this highly regimented system of production, you can see the director's vision come through if they have enough style and they have enough personality and they have enough artistic vision and competence to put it in there. Okay. It might be subconscious, it might be intentional, but you can read it in the film. And that's the basics of auteur theory. You've probably mostly been familiar with this as like the central concept of film theory for in popular culture, at very least, for a long time. It's one of the first things you learn about movies is that, you need to know the director, right? So film people go on and on and on about Spielberg, and they go on and on and on about David Fincher and Chris Nolan. Okay. So you already have some sense of this. We're going to pick up these strands and talk about them in our discussion in class. So come prepped for that. I'm sure you probably already have had that discussion rather than watch this video very early in the morning, and that's fine. But yeah, I just wanted to lay out all of the parameters here so that we could have a real good discussion of D.A. Miller and cover that essay during the session in some depth. So I'll see you all in class. And yeah, take care of yourselves out there.